I'm going to go ahead and call the City Council regular meeting for Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019 to order. Madam City Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
I will. Mayor Christy Malchow. Present. Deputy Mayor Karen Moran.
Present.
Councilmember Tom Hornish.
Present.
Councilmember Jason Ritchie.
Present.
Councilmember Chris Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart. Here. Councilmember Ramiro Valderrama.
Present.
Okay, Madam City Clerk, we do have a quorum. Councilmember Stewart, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Certainly.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, to entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilmember Valderrama.
The proclamation?
Oh, yeah, but you have your light on. That's later. We got to get through the public comment and all that stuff. Okay, very good.
I have it.
Okay, so all those in favor of the approval of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, by a vote of 7-0, the agenda is approved. Next, we'll have public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to address the council. 3-minute limit per person, or 5 minutes if representing the official position of a recognized community organization. If you would like to show a video or PowerPoint, it must be submitted or emailed by 5 p.m. end of business day to the city clerk, Melanie Anderson, at manderson@sammamish.us. Please be aware that council meetings are videotaped and available to the public. Do we have a list? Nope. Would anyone like to address the council? That might be a first. Okay. All right, so on to consent. Oh, up at the podium, please.
Too good to be true.
Hello, I'm Mary Wichter, and I have just regular public comment. I'm at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. I just want to let you know that staff has done a lot of work over the years, and sometimes they work on maps, and when they have maps, they're very useful. Sometimes those maps get in packets, or they're available as part of a basin plan, but they never actually go up online. And so you're going to see some things come forward, like, for example, tonight the Stormwater Code has had 2 different maps that have been put up for critical drainage areas. So I would like those types of things online. The other thing is we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on basin plans for Zaccoose Creek, for Ebright Creek, and for George Davis Creek, and those have been mapped. And currently our online mapping tool, the Sammamish Property Tool, does not have a streams layer, but I know it's been worked on. I believe Ms. Danica Globalcar has actually done a lot of work on it, so it's available, but it's just not available to people to use. So I understand kind of open government's coming. I did have a meeting with one of the GIS staff regarding my docket request that's upcoming too. And it's just, I think if we have the information, it should be put up and made available. So things like steep slopes maps, the stream layer is very important. Something from the critical drainage areas from tonight's topic and what's been done in the past would be really good. And if those are available, then people can use them, and you can always put a disclaimer that says, you know, maps aren't perfect or whatever, but if the maps are there, it just really helps a lot of people. So I just want to bring that up. Thanks.
Mr. City Manager, is it possible that we can kind of keep a running list of the maps that was kind of stated? So we have, I noted there are some pretty good maps, and they're very easy to understand because it talks about the number of feet of impervious surface that you're adding and those type of things. It is nice to have a nice, you know, repository of information, and if we can maybe get some of those maps on there, I think that would be nice.
Okay, not a problem.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Entertain a motion for consent calendar.
I move we approve the consent calendar.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 7-0, the consent calendar has passed. Okay, next we'll move on to our proclamations. Our first proclamation is for Welcoming Week, and Councilmember Valderrama has agreed to go ahead and read that for us. Yes. Oh. Sure, yeah, absolutely. We'll switch orders. There may be someone here to read that one. We're going to reverse order so that we'll have the proclamation, which is item number 13, which is the Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and Councilmember Hornish is going to read that one for us.
Thank you. We have a proclamation for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Whereas each year in the United States, more than 15,000 children from birth to 19 years old were diagnosed with cancer, equal to about 42 childhood cancer diagnoses each day. And whereas each year worldwide, there are more than 300,000 new childhood cancer diagnoses, equal to about every 3 minutes a family will hear the words, "Your child has cancer." And whereas, although the 5-year survival rate for childhood cancers has reached 80%, nearly 2,000 American children under the age of 19 still die each year from cancer, making it the leading killer of children by disease. And whereas those that do survive will face at least one chronic health condition later on in life, not limited, but including heart, liver, lung damage, infertility, secondary cancers, and growth deficits. And whereas the causes of childhood cancer are largely unknown and more studies are needed to understand which treatments work best for children. And whereas cancer treatment for children often must differ from traditional adult treatments to take into account children's developmental needs and other factors. And whereas hundreds of children are being treated for cancer in Washington state, and whereas Washington is a caring state and community that supports children and families, now, therefore, Mayor Christy Malchow, on behalf of the Sammamish City Council, does hereby proclaim September 2019 as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And next, we will go back to item 12, which is the proclamation for Welcoming Week. Do we have someone read it? Do we have someone read it, or no? We can have a council member read it otherwise. Council member? Okay, Council member Valderrama, would you
We're on?
please? Thank you.
Okay. It's my pleasure to read this proclamation. Whereas the population of East Side continues to grow rapidly, increasing by well over 36%, or over 100,000 residents since 2010, and whereas over 30% of the newcomers have arrived from places outside the United States, and whereas more than 1/3 of the East Side residents now speak a language other than English at home, and whereas diversity is the lifeblood of our community, bringing fresh perspectives and new ideas, innovation, and entrepreneurial spirit, leadership, and hard workers, and whereas our success depends on ensuring that all our residents feel welcome here. Now, therefore, we, the mayors of Bellevue, Issaquah, Kirkland, Redmond, and Sammamish, Washington, proclaim September 13 through September 22nd, 2019 as Eastside Welcoming Week in our cities, and call on all our residents to join together to build stronger communities and participate in one or more of the dozens of Welcoming Week events across the East Side. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have a public hearing. This is on the ordinance amending chapters 13.10 and 13.20 of the Sammamish Municipal Code related to surface water management, and amending Sammamish Municipal Code chapters 21A.15 related to technical terms and land use definitions. Mr. City Manager, does staff have a presentation before we open the public hearing?
Yeah.
Yes, very good.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. So I'll turn it over to Danica, who will be doing the presentation and give you the information.
Mr. City Manager. Top lines down. Those two in the back, on the side there, because the sun is
They've got some streaming sun here.
hitting me right in the face.
not opening at all.
Nope. The other two on the wall. Put us into darkness. We'll pretend it's February. There you go.
Thank you.
That was the PowerPoint opening, though.
Yeah, let me see if I can open it.
We don't get sun much of the year, and then you go close on us.
I told you, we're pretending it's February in here.
We can open the back ones.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's fine.
as long as we're waiting for a PowerPoint presentation that won't open.
There we go. Are we okay with your PowerPoint?
Word. Let me just try here.
Is that okay, the back?
Just the desk.
There it
No, is that it? That's PDF.
I can brief it as a PDF.
But is this one the right version?
That is the right version. I'll just scroll through a PDF instead of click through a PowerPoint.
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
okay.
Melanie, can we put it up here or no? That's fine. I was just curious if, it will be up there, okay. So make sure the audience can follow along.
Got it? There it is.
Nope.
Oh, come up, should come up. Not coming up? There you go.
Okay.
All right, my mic is on. Excellent. All right, good evening, City Council and citizens. My name is Danica Globakar, Senior Stormwater Engineer here at the city, and this evening I will be presenting Stormwater Code amendments. It's in a PDF, not a PowerPoint, but we'll still get the message across. So as you know, the Stormwater Code amendments, this process has been a little bit of a lengthy, iterative process, but I think we've reached somewhere tonight that it incorporates your values and priorities, it's environmentally conscious, and it reflects the input that we've received from citizens. So my goal with this presentation is to brief you on where we landed with these code amendments and to have you feel confident that this is what you are ready to adopt via ordinance at the next meeting in September. So our agenda this evening, I'll go over a brief project timeline of how this whole process has evolved over the last 2 years. I'll review the code amendments, just a summary of them. That includes some definition updates as well as a refinement of our critical areas themselves. And then I'll just discuss the public hearing and deliberation process. Okay, I'm gonna make that a little bigger. Works. That works. All right, so although this timeline starts in March of 2019, it really goes back to about the fall of 2017 when our former program manager, Tawny Delzell, started working on the code amendments. And it has started and stopped a few times based on our stormwater team's workload. It had to be paused and then picked back up. But the most recent iteration started in March of this year, where she dusted back off the code issues and described them to you and asked for your direction initially on how we wanted to go forward with these critical drainage areas and drainage review. She met with stakeholders in March, in the spring of this year, to gather citizen input. And then you'll see starred there on these dates are times that she has come to council for more direction and input as, like I said, it's been an iterative process. So she came June and July to you to describe these updates and make sure that we as staff are understanding your intent. And now we're here in red, September 3rd, for the public hearing, and also to present, like I said, where we landed with these code updates. And our goal is to come back in the next regular meeting to adopt the ordinance. Okay, So the first piece of our code amendments, and you've seen most of this before, again, this is just a review, is that we updated our definitions. So two critical definitions that we were looking at was the definition of a critical drainage area. We moved the location of this definition from SMC 21A to Chapter 13, so it's nested within the rest of the stormwater material. We updated the definition slightly. The specifics are in the council packet, all redlined and stricken, so you can see those. It's not too substantive. One key thing that we noted is that we are requiring site-specific evaluation for all projects to evaluate if they are in a critical drainage area. So it's not just based on a map, they actually have to do an assessment of the site. The other definition that we updated, or we're recommending for updating as part of this code update, is the definition of a landslide hazard drainage area. Again, move this definition from 21A to 13 where it makes more sense with the rest of the code. And we clarified that landslide hazard areas are also considered landslide hazard drainage areas. This allows us to capture all projects in these critical areas and make sure that we're being environmentally conscious, and we're making sure that not too much new impervious surface is being added to landslide hazard areas. All right, this is one of those maps Mary was talking about. I made this map. I'm quite proud of it. So this is some of the meat and potatoes of our critical, the code amendments for our critical areas. So, and let me get this straight. It's a very complicated code. So our new chapter, or the revised chapter for drainage review, this specifies when drainage review is required. As you know, drainage review is looking at a project, any permit that comes in, and assessing how it meets our drainage requirements. Some of the requirements for drainage review is looking at whether a project requires detention, whether it requires water quality treatment, whether a tight line is required. Those are just three of the many core requirements that drainage review requires. So under our previous code, any project in a critical drainage area, which includes landslide hazard areas and areas that drain to Pine and Beaver Lake, any project with any amount of impervious surface proposed would trigger drainage review. It's a pretty arduous engineering process, and it was quite a burden to individual homeowners. So City Council, you requested that we bifurcate this code. So as a reminder, our critical drainage areas are areas that drain to Pine and Beaver Lake. These purple areas right here, it's kind of hard to see on the screen. That's one critical drainage area. The other type of critical drainage area we have in our city are landslide hazard drainage areas. Those are the areas in this orange hash and orange polygon. So with the board of the city, it's all of our steeper slopes and the areas that drain to them. So you recommend, your guidance to us was that you thought there was a different level of impact to areas that drain to Pine and Beaver Lake versus areas that are on steep slopes. So you requested we bifurcate this code and actually trifurcate this code. So what we have developed based on your input is that for projects draining to Pine and Beaver Lake, there's a threshold, or we're recommending a threshold of 500 square foot for drainage review, which means if a project comes in Pine or Beaver Lake proposing less than that, they would not have to go through drainage review. They would be allowed to proceed with their project. You requested a tighter control on landslide hazard areas and landslide hazard drainage areas, recognizing that those are areas of increased erosion and risk. So we are proposing a 200 square foot threshold for those areas. That's in orange and hash orange. What that means is any project that is in those areas, with the exception of Inglewood and Tamarack, any project in those orange areas that meets the definition of a landslide hazard or hazard drainage area would be exempt from drainage review if they come under 200 square feet. If they go over 200 square feet, they have to conduct drainage review. You also asked that we include a zero threshold for the Tamarack and Inglewood neighborhoods, noting the lack of stormwater infrastructure there. And so this code that we're recommending captures that and recommends that, or not recommends, it stipulates that there is a zero net new impervious threshold for projects in the Tamarack and Inglewood areas. So any project that comes in requires a permit that's proposing any net new impervious surface 1 square foot would require drainage review by our engineers to assess the impact. All right. So now that we got those definitions out of the way, we have additional code components that I'll go over. So additionally, in this chapter, chapter 13, we took your input and we've added a limit of 35% total impervious surface allowed per lot in landslide hazard drainage areas. This addresses projects that are already have a lot of impervious on these steeper slopes and say they're still under that 200 square foot threshold. This would catch projects that would exceed that 35% of total lot impervious surface. So additionally, we've added criteria for considering exemptions and exceptions to those core requirements under drainage review. What this means is that take a project in the Tamarack or Inglewood neighborhood, 0 threshold. Say a project comes in and wants to add 100 square feet of net new impervious. They must go through drainage review. There must be an engineering assessment to determine the impacts of that project and to mitigate those impacts. However, we also recognize that sometimes there are situations that it's very difficult for small property owners, small homeowners, to meet some of the tighter requirements. So if you're thinking about a 100 square foot new deck addition, for example, if they had to follow strict drainage review and implement water detention, and the only way to do that would be to remove a tree or to dig into that steep slope. That obviously is very detrimental to the project. So the code, it doesn't give them a free pass to say, okay, well, there's a tree, you don't have to do this. But it says, all right, the onus is on you as the property owner and their engineer. Tell us how you're going to mitigate that you don't have to put in a flow control facility perhaps, but what are you going to do to mitigate that to create a comparable result and to not impact your neighbors, to not impact the downstream flow path? So like I said, not a free pass, but it does recognize that challenges exist and just a blanket application of the drainage manual is not always appropriate. However, to note, in Inglewood and Tamarack, there are absolutely no exemptions from the tightline requirement. Again, that was based on your, I believe it was the July 3rd meeting. We've also added a reasonable use accommodation to the code, and it just specifies that when application of all these requirements denies all reasonable use, an exception may be approved. But again, that is absolutely not a blanket statement. It requires engineering judgment, director approval, and mitigation. Yes.
Danica, is it easier to go through the deck and then do all the questions at the end? Pam had kind of asked a similar question, and I think you were going to get to that slide where we were going to talk about the public hearing and deliberation. Is it more is it more appropriate for us to couch all of our questions together at the end of your presentation?
This is the last slide.
Okay.
So if you just let me go with this, and I'll be done, and I'll take all questions. Nice and short.
No, I think she's got one more slide.
This is my last slide.
I have to hang again.
I appreciate your patience. Thank you. All right, so this, like I said, last slide. This is just a kind of a wrap up. So we're here September 3rd. We filed a SEPA for this, and we're at the public hearing, deliberation. Again, our goal is to bring this back to you to adopt via ordinance next meeting. So with that, now I will happily take all questions.
Okay. So let's just be sure to limit this to questions for staff, and then we'll have our deliberation after the public hearing. So Councilmember Valderrama.
Okay. So we go back to the slide before. And for this item specific, and I understand the reasoning for specify that Inglewood and Tamarack, that there will not be an exception for the tight line. But I would have thought that some other areas like Southeast 24th would have had a similar topography and similar requirements. And we have had past councils have required tight lines to be done for properties over there. So I'm wondering why, while I'm supportive of this, I'm just wondering why other areas did not fall into the same requirement.
Right, and so the tight line is still required. So let me take a step back. When drainage review is required for any project, be it one property for like a deck addition, a new single family home, or a subdivision, drainage review is usually required when it meets those thresholds. And when we're saying here that the tight line could be waived, it's really for these small projects, not large projects. Large projects, even single-family homes, they do require tight lines.
Okay, so if there's a dense combination of homes on Southeast 24th, because they're selling them, it would come under the same type of a requirement?
Are you talking as part of a subdivision?
That's
or-
correct.
Yes, so that would be, all of our subdivisions have tight lines, the ones that have come in the last 10, 20 years under those
But
requirements.
not the tight line, but that there would be no exception for them under the subdivision.
Yes, there would be no exceptions or exemptions.
Okay.
This presentation and our code amendments are really geared at those smaller projects that have felt the squeeze from our no exemption, no adjustment, nothing policy. Most projects that are proposing more than even 2 houses trigger all of the thresholds of our drainage manual. They require full drainage review, they require detention, water quality treatment, tight line, and there are no exemptions or exceptions for them generally.
Thank you.
So this is really the small projects.
Councilmember Stewart?
So I'd like to echo Mary's sentiments that a lot of great work on this, and I know it's been a really long time and a lot of work, so thank you. But I share Mary's concern when it comes to cumulative effects. So I think you guys did a great job, and now that we kind of see it laid out, I still worry. I think there are 2 sets of cumulative effects. There's the cumulative effect on my lot. So in my house, I want to add, that 100 square foot deck, and then I want to add a patio outside of that, and then I want to make my driveway bigger, or whatever all those things are, that each one of those individually would fall below the threshold, but we have to have a way to make sure that on that lot, when I hit what the threshold should have been originally, that we make sure we trigger the right reviews. And I'm not sure that this code captures that, so it might be possible for me to continue to find ways, like, we'll take around Beaver Lake, for example. As long as everything I do is 400 square feet, then I'm never going to hit that review because it's all under 500 square feet. So how do we have some sort of a limit for the lot? And then the other cumulative effects are when you have 10 houses in some area and each one comes in at $499, at some point, right, those cumulative effects are going to be greater than what we probably anticipated, and none of them had a drainage review. So at 10 at $499 is a lot of square feet that we just added, and there's been no drainage review. So how do we account for that as well?
Great questions. And I had a little bit of time to review Mary's packet before coming down here. And I was thinking about that as well. So I can answer both questions. So the first one, the cumulative effects on a single lot and the worry that a project will come in with $499, that is a concern. But the control we have over that is that, say a project comes in the first time at $499, all right, they're exempt in Beaver Lake, say. The second time they come in for a project, say it's 2 to 5 years later, we would be able to see that new impervious they added, 2 to 5 years ago, and then see, okay, they're proposing another $499. And actually, per our drainage manual, our King County Stormwater adopted manual, when a previous area comes in exempt one time and you're considering the next permit, that has to be, the old new impervious has to be considered. Okay. So it comes in and now all of a sudden it's 998 or what have you. So you actually have to apply that. And that is stipulated in our manual, any new impervious added after 2001.
Great.
So that's a way to capture it.
So that's great. One other thing that it made me think of, so let's say that I come in with that first one at $499. Is there a way to make sure, though, that it's still not over some sort of a maximum limit for the lot size? So if I have a really tiny lot and I've got my 1,999 square foot house, and then I add my 499 square foot deck on it, is there some lot size that we can make sure we're hitting that limit as well, so that 499 isn't always exempt if that's 90% of my lot?
Yeah, so 2 points to that. So one, this new code does have a maximum of 35% impervious for the landslide hazard drainage areas. So it captures that. For non-landslide hazard drainage areas, so basically Pine and Beaver Lake, the impervious surface percentages would be governed by our planning department's requirements. So that's point one.
See, she's very passionate. She
Sorry,
gets
I'm-
all choked up about it. I love it.
I was trying through. I was sick last week. So the other thing I will note, and this kind of feeds into your comment about the cumulative effects in a single neighborhood. Sorry. So I just did some quick, thanks, some quick number crunching. And this is actually really interesting. So if you take an R4 lot, that's 10,000 square feet, totally treed. If you take a 100-year storm, that's dumping 4 inches of water on that whole lot over a 24-hour period, it produces roughly a gallon of water, or you think of a milk gallon, a gallon a second. That's how much water is dumping off a fully treed, non-developed lot. You put on 200 square feet of impervious surface, you'll increase the runoff from that lot a tablespoon a second. So just think of that, fully, undeveloped lot, a gallon of water a second. You put it on a little shed or a patio, and that's an extra tablespoon. So it's not a terrible lot. So there is an impact, yes, especially if
Did you say a tablespoon a second, though?
Right, versus a gallon a second for a totally treed lot. You put, say, a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot of impervious on that. Okay, so treed lot, gallon a second. A lot with 3,000 square foot of impervious, that's about 2 gallons a second, 2 gallons of water being bailed off the site. You build an extra shed, that's a tablespoon a second.
It sounds small, but I'm trying to think, like, how many seconds are there in a day? Like, that's a lot of it's a great metaphor and it's a great mental image, but I'm thinking, like, trying to do some quick math. That's, 3,600 tablespoons an hour.
So that
I don't know how much that is in gallons, but it sounds like a lot. So I don't know, I honestly don't know if that's really a lot. And again, if I multiply that by the 10 lots, and now, I just don't know. It just still seems like if it's really not a big deal, then we probably don't need any of this code, but I feel like it is a big deal. That's why we have the code. So if we can add, 2,500 square feet of impervious surface with no drainage review because I spread it out over multiple lots, that's like a new house without a drainage review in that one area.
we don't see that very often. And that's kind of what you were talking about of we're concerned about the idea of a house adding 499.
Right.
I have not seen that. And
Okay.
granted, my brief history here at the city, but other development review engineers have not seen that either. Permitting is a very challenging process. People often don't want to go through it in quick succession back to back.
Right.
So I haven't seen that kind of development.
Okay. Is there an easy way to kind of put something in there, though, to capture that, just out of curiosity, so that we, again, when you spread it across multiple lots, is there a way to make sure that we're not allowing too much impervious surface to happen without any review? And I just think of, people on the downhill side. So I'm not in a particular area, but I'm, just outside of those landslide hazard areas, right? Any additional runoff is going to potentially start to affect other people. And I just do worry that over time, those can add up. And I realize there might not be a lot left, but it seems like there must be some provision we can write in that just has a way of keeping track of that or something.
I'm not exactly sure how to capture that.
Okay.
I think that the code, the thresholds that we've created based on your input, I think this is actually a really strong way to address those cumulative impacts. And I don't know what my professional opinion is worth, but I think this is actually a pretty strong code based on your input. And that, so for these landslide hazard drainage areas, 200 square feet is pretty small, really, when you think about it. It's a 10 by 20 square foot patio deck. Compared to the size of an overall lot, it's a very small percentage, and I consider that effect to be negligible. We don't see every single house putting in the max. We just don't see that. So I think this is a very strong code as written.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
I'm going to add on a little bit to what Councilmember Stewart was talking about, which is when we're talking about the cumulative effect and we're talking about the 499 square feet, and you've said that you keep track of a home that has added something and then might come back for a permit 2 years later. Okay, so what happens? Is that forever? Is that until the home is sold? Is that, I mean, I'm just wondering what are, when they do that, how long is that held on that lot? So say somebody put a deck on and put in for 499 square feet, and so it was exempt, and the house sells, and then when somebody else comes in and wants to do something, do they start out with a 499 square foot, in the hole basically, that they didn't know was already used? I mean, how is that going to work, and how are we going to keep track of that?
That's, again, very good questions. To my knowledge, it would not vest, if that's the word you want to use, vest with the person. It would be attached to that property. So even if it's sold, someone would possibly come in, there's a sports court on their property, and they say they want to add a new patio. In addition to that, they would come in and we would be able to see that parcel number and see previous permit activity associated with that parcel number. And then a quick aerial, imagery review reveals, oh, they did add impervious surface after 2001. And that's really the key date for us in stormwater, is because a lot of regulations became enacted in 2001. Prior to that, it was a little bit of the wild, wild west with stormwater. After that, regulations really tightened up. And that's why that date, it's pretty much any new impervious after 2001 must be addressed and mitigated.
So I have a quick question, and this is in 13.20.040. It's number 5 and letter C. And I want to understand how we are going to define the word significant. And I'll read you what it says here. It says, no exemptions or exceptions to core requirements number 1, 3, and 8 shall be granted when the director deems that granting such exemptions would cause significant impact to a downstream property, natural resources, or public infrastructure. How are we defining significant? And I'll tell you why I'm asking. There was a development out here on 228th, which I won't name, that took out all the trees, right? And we're talking coniferous trees. They do their job in the winter. They suck up all the water. You take all the coniferous trees off. And the downhill neighbors had what I would consider a significant impact, but I don't know that the city deems it a significant impact. And that impact was water in basements, right? We contained the impervious surface water, right? But what we didn't contain was all the rest of the water that was falling on the site that the coniferous trees were then sucking up, but we took them all away. And so all the water is left to Mother Nature and it goes downhill. So how are we defining significant?
So, Mayor, would you just reorient me? I'm in the 13.20.040. What section was it? 5?
5 and letter C.
5. Okay, there we are. It's minuscule.
Mayor, I may be able to help Danica out a little bit here, but
Please.
assuming that there is no specific unique definition of significant in the code, then the rules of statutory construction would direct you just to the common dictionary definition. And that is literally what the staff or hearing examiner or judge would look at in the absence of a specific definition within the code.
So it's a little wishy-washy is what you're saying.
A little bit, but I think, Mayor, what the particular development you were referring to is a large one.
It is.
Right. So again, this code would not exempt projects like that from the core requirements. A lot of the modifications we made here was based on years of input from citizens and countless hours of staff time, crunching these tiny projects that could not meet the code. So when we talk about, significant challenges, it's really referring to those, like I said, those single family, not even single family homes, just single properties trying to add less than 500 or 200 square feet. And we're telling them, I've had to tell people as staff, sorry, you can't add a 100 square foot patio. You have to build a tank under your property and take out trees to do that.
Yeah.
So that's, it's kind of a cost benefit based on common sense and significance in this case.
Okay. Yeah. So significance is just defined by the dictionary. Okay. I don't see any more questions. So if council is done with questions, then I would move that we open up the, oh, do you have a
I
question?
did have one more.
Okay. Councilmember Stewart?
So again, thank you, Mary. On your, on the table for the density and dimensions where we, what is it? Residential zones. We have the 30% maximum for R1. Do we have percentages for the R4 and R6?
This is not my area of expertise. David?
Come on down.
David, you seem lonely back there. We thought we'd get you involved.
Just plugging away at perennial email. So the question came up with regard to dimensional standards tables found in 21A. The dimensional standards tables include an impervious surface limitation for some of the zones, and it includes, instead of an impervious surface limitation, a minimum required yard area for other zones. That change was made in 2016 with some other changes that related to the setback requirements. And the idea there is that for some lots, you're limited on the amount of actual impervious surface that you're allowed to have, but that doesn't mean that you can't hardscape the rest of your property. There are other properties here in the city that the then council found that would be beneficial to limit the amount of hardscape on a property.
Can you turn your mic on? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I'll pick it up. So the idea there is that there are multiple different types of surfaces, right? The first type of surface that you have is an impervious surface. That's one where compaction or impermeability causes water to sheet flow when it rains and causes flooding in one area. So where there's a depression, you might see water running. And what it does is it affects the watershed features and it speeds water into streams, causes downcutting, all the things that Danica's trying to fix. The other is related to our quality of neighborhoods, and that's related to hardscape surfaces. Where a hardscape surface goes in doesn't necessarily mean that it's impervious, but what it does do is it precludes the regeneration of vegetation. It impacts tree root zones. It causes a harder feeling in the community, reverberation, things occur that are generally not seen as beneficial to a living environment. So the idea there was that instead of focusing on the impervious surface limitation, which is the stormwater manual, and that's where that should be, the idea was to instead put in a requirement that you have to retain a certain percentage of your yard in yard space. And yard is defined. There are things that are allowed to be considered as yard area. That's what happened there. That's why some of them have an impervious surface limitation and others have a yard area minimum requirement, if that makes sense.
It does. I guess the next question, so thank you, that's excellent. The next question would be, how does a 45% minimum yard area compare to a X% maximum impervious surface? Like mathematically, again, struggling to do the quick math in my head.
Yeah, so with that yard area, so if you had a 45% maximum or minimum required yard area, right, that would allow you 55% hardscaped area. And the hardscaped area could be up to 55% impervious per the land use regulations, right, but you'd be bumping into the stormwater manual, which might cause you to reduce that amount. One of the issues that we've seen here in the city is technology has advanced, and we have multiple different methods of creating hardscape surfaces that are pervious. So what that's led to is allowing people to basically go in and put down pervious patios on their entire yard. Something that my dad would have liked to do when I was a kid, when I had to mow the lawn all the time. He would have loved to have paved the whole yard, but those types of surfaces were not available back then. So now we have pervious concretes, we have pervious pavers, there's all sorts of things that you can do that allow you to put down hard surfaces, but that are not considered to be impervious.
Okay. I like that, but I'm still not sure the comparison. So for like 45% minimum yard area versus like for an R1, you said you can have a maximum of 30% impervious. I guess just trying to think of an example in my head of like, what's the size of a lot,
Yeah.
an R4 lot with
10,000 square
55%?
feet.
Yep.
And if you were to allow for 45% or require 45% to be yard area, that's 4,500 square feet of area that cannot be hardscaped. And then what that would do is allow for 6,500 square feet of area, 5,500 square feet
Okay.
of area that could be hardscaped. And of that, 3,000 square feet could be impervious, which
Okay.
would include your roof, which would include your driveway if it was not an impervious driveway, or excuse me, a pervious driveway. What that does is it allows applicants who are trying to design a home to fit their needs to work with different types of surfaces and technologies and work with our stormwater engineers to come up with a design that meets these threshold requirements, so that they're not seen as generating too much stormwater from their impervious surfaces. They're seen as recharging the groundwater. We have primarily well water here in the city, so it is a good thing to actually direct the water back into the ground as long as it's not considered to be an injection well,
Right.
because those can be seen as contaminating our groundwater sources. So in this case, what it is we work closely with an applicant, with the Public Works group, with the planning group, at the counter, to talk about how to properly design a yard space for sidewalks, patios, driveways, roof surfaces, all those things that any one of us might want to have in our yard, and ensure that their amount of hardscape and the appropriateness of the character of their development is matching the surrounding community as best we can with the limitations and the tools we have in that toolbox.
Great. So I love all that. That's great. I guess my last question, I promise, is given that, and given that that seems like, pretty reasonable, I guess the other question would be, why do we have one limitation for R1, R8, R12, and R18, and a different one for R4 and R6? Why don't we just use one or the other? Is there really rationale, or we just haven't gotten to making it consistent?
So we had that same discussion back in 2016
Okay.
when the proposed change was put into effect. I don't know the rationale for it. I personally, in terms of applying the code and working with the staff and creating things that are clear, consistent, would like to see it be modified to match what the other zones have. So which tool you want to choose, the place to manage impervious surface is in the stormwater manual. It's with the Public Works regulations. The place to manage, from my perspective, the place to manage character, hardscape, limitations on things that are going to affect the community in a different way are in the land use regulations. That's my perception of how things are applied properly. If we have a 35% limitation in the R1 in the land use code, and then we have a 40% allowance in the stormwater manual, I'm not saying that's the case. It just is an inconsistency,
Right.
and it causes a lot of confusion
Yeah.
with stormwater engineers.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so maybe next round we can figure out how we can make these all kind of using the same set of calculations. Okay, thank you. That was helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay. I don't see any additional questions. I'm going to open the public hearing, and if there's a sign-in sheet back there. Oh, nobody signed up. Just kidding, Mary. No. Okay, Mary. And then anyone else desiring to make public comment on this hearing can just kind of queue up along the wall here.
Hello, my name's Mary Wichter, and I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. And for full transparency, I do live in the neighborhood of Tamarack, which was platted in 1964. Stormwater regulations weren't required until 1977, so it's called a historic plat, and that definition is from the city before I started speaking in 2013. Inglewood was also platted in 1889, so I loved everything that Danica said, and David Powell was absolutely awesome. But again, we've gotten to the regular development, the subdivision development, and we're not talking about the little stuff. For example, Tamarack and Inglewood used the 1998 Wild West Stormwater Code until the 1st of January in 2017. There were 9 houses built in Tamarack by one developer that were all 1,998 square feet, and then they add on to it later on. And there are 13 houses that were built in the landslide hazard drainage area before it was defined that to be, because we got that map changed for Tamarack. And then there are 20 houses that are built above me. And even though it's a little bit of water, it runs downhill and it has cumulative effects. And that's why we've got to this stormwater code, and that's why we are here. So I wanted to say a couple things. Great question from the mayor on significant. I'd also like you to ask about the definition of severe. You'll see severe erosion, and if it could just be clarified, that would be awesome. I emailed a bunch of things, and they were very late in the day, so I'm sorry you didn't get them earlier. And I also wanted to thank Danica for saying that the King County Code doesn't let you do the looping where you keep going through. But I know in the past, records have not been kept on an individual basis, so people don't know what they own when they buy it. They don't know what to maintain, and it isn't recorded. I have some very minor changes that could be added to the code to do that. The other thing is everybody's talking about a 10,000 square foot lot. Well, in Inglewood, there are 1,000 square feet, 2,500 square feet, 5,000, 7,500, and there are parts and fragments. You have to deal with those. The MPDES requirements said starting 2017, you had to deal with lots of any size. So I came up with something called 20% of the lot area, and you should use that for land disturbance and other things. It's a very good number to use. I've done charts and tables with Tawny, and I've got it in here again. They're very small changes, and what that lets you do is when you've got those tiny, screwy little irregular lots, it makes people, A, they can't build something big on them, and B, they can't just come in and clear it, because that was happening before too. So I think that those are very important to have in. The other thing is we have 3,500 septics about in the whole city. You do not have any plans for addressing those, so you really need to protect those people's septic systems so they can continue to live in their house. So you can't just do it downgrading. It has to be above where you can't cut slopes. It has to be beside and below. So there's some very small edits for that. I did put all the goals and policies telling you why this stuff is important. It's already in there. It just needs to happen in code. And I think I covered most of everything. Stephanie Sullivan actually had sent an email back at the end of 2016 which talked about, hey, if you're doing multiple phase stuff, you need to actually come up with a number that you're doing it best. And I'm a little bit worried about pump systems. I think gravity flow is best. So I would ask that you suggest that staff look at the changes I've made, so in the next 2 weeks they could come up. I think they're very small. I'm willing to work with anybody to get them, but I think not having the changes will bring problems and gaps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, so you guys can pass these.
Yeah, you can pass them down.
These are 2 separate copies, one's front and back and one's one-sided, so. Hi, so my name is Zachary Van Nuys. I live in Redmond, Washington, but this was actually my Eagle Scout project. So
Do you need your address?
18115 Northeast 113th Street, Redmond, Washington.
Thank
you. Basically, I am a member of Trout Unlimited, and I needed a project for my Eagle project, and I basically found this with the help of our full-time employee at Trout Unlimited. His name is Dave Kyle. And basically this was, I forgot the address, but it's in the city of Sammamish. It's
on, I think, Northeast 6th Street, right?
I'm
At
not
headwaters of George Davis Creek.
Yes, yeah, the headwaters of George Davis Creek, yeah. So basically right off of the road there was like a whole pile that was visible off of the road where at least 40 to 50 years ago, somebody decided it was a good place to dump a bunch of tires.
Yep.
So my project was to get all of those out of there. When I had initially went there, I counted like 50 tires, and then the actual day of the project, we pulled out 83, and then there were definitely more under this like giant blowdown that had like 4 trees across it that we couldn't move. So I suspect there are still several still under there, but we were able to get out 83 tires, and you can see the finished product of the creek. It's, I think, quite miraculous, but yeah. That's, I just wanted to basically inform you of what I did and all that, so, yeah.
Thank you.
all I
That's
got.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can hop in really quick, I'm sorry. Zach was and Dave Kyle from Trout Unlimited had contacted me wanting to share with you, City Council, the awesome work he did. And I'm sorry I didn't coordinate better for this day, but thank you so much for coming in and sharing with them. Thank you.
Yeah, those pictures are pretty
This-
impressive.
This work
Yeah.
looks incredible.
Yeah. Oh, and then there was also one oven, or no, it was a stove and oven that was just as old, and that was, we basically had to take that thing apart and then,
This is on the back
Take it
side. Is this
out.
on the back side of
yeah. And then, so the,
Tamarack, right?
actually,
Put it in that Freed house.
yeah.
Yep, I've been down there before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then we had a winch to pull all of those tires out. That was absolutely, I would say, key to the whole project. It was actually a guy I met through Instagram. I sent him an email, and he's a member of Search and Rescue, and he does all kinds of stuff like that. And his son was actually an Eagle Scout too. So it was, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think we got one more.
Karen Herring, 23684 Southeast 32nd Way. It is most certainly time that we adopt our stormwater code. Critical drainage areas need every possible consideration, as do all hazard areas. So thank you, staff and City Council and citizens, for making sure this is happening. All the other stuff that everyone else said, but I want to ask if Zach's little product can become a thing on the website so it can be shared with everyone, because that's really cool, and thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah. That might be good to see if we can get in touch with him and get the actual digital photos, and those could be shared. Perfect. Yeah. Yes.
If I
please.
may.
Yes.
Zach? Yeah, right behind you, Sharon. Right? Perfect.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, anyone else wishing to address the council on this public hearing? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and turn it back over to council for additional questions and/or deliberation. Councilmember Stewart.
I do think, again, Mary submitted a couple of things where I think it's not so much a change, but just a clarification. So in 13.20.040, 5A1.
Are you looking in Mary's packet that she gave
Yeah.
us? Can you tell us which page number it is?
Oh, well, it's her B. It's page 97 of 138.
Perfect. Thank you.
So on that paragraph where you talk about will not discharge to streams of gradient 15% or more, and will not be located near or up, I guess it said like
Gradient.
upgraded of a septic drain field. She recommends saying near, because you go on to say that it would be a 100-foot radius. So I think your intention is that we make sure we protect all around, not just up, but by saying that up there, it kind of implies that it's only things that are uphill. So we probably want to say anything that's near the septic. Is there?
I can do a little bit more research on that. I'd rather make sure that
Absolutely.
I fully understand and convey that to you, what that means and where the danger and the hazard lies.
Absolutely. I think that would be wonderful. So if you could look into that. And then further, and it says within a 100-foot radius around the discharge location. She recommends any area of proposed land disturbance or the discharge location. So again, if we could look into Is that overly restrictive, or is that kind of the type of restriction we want to look at that says anything that's going to disturb that area, let's make sure we take the appropriate closer look. I think that is an excellent addition. And there was one more. Here on page 102 of 138, which is section, this is in the flow chart for determining the type of drainage review required. So it's 1.2.1 core requirement number 1. Item number 2, where it says Public Works, it says drainage easement for this system must be secured from downstream property owners and recorded prior to engineering plan approval. She recommends impacted or downstream. And again, if you could look into that, I think that is also an excellent addition, because sometimes the impacted area might not be downstream.
I will say initially from reading that pardon me, that word is a little squishy.
Okay.
Because how you define impacted may
enough.
vary from person to person.
So maybe we can just find some language that doesn't just say downstream, but that applies to anybody where we could be creating runoff. I mean, we can be more specific so that it's not too squishy.
I can look into that, but I'll bring also back some common enemy doctrine that governs the stormwater industry.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
I want to circle back and try to get some sort of hardened definition of what the word severe means.
And what particular, can you give me an example in the code where you're looking?
And I'm not going backwards. I'm trying to go back to, like Christy found an example, but when we're using words like severe, or we're trying to find, those are kind of open-ended words. And so if we're going to use the word severe, and let me see where we had it.
13.20.040, paragraph 1, perhaps, page 97 of 138.
Yeah, then to try to figure, what are you saying when you're saying severe?
Again, it's a little bit of a grayer area. It means it's a way for staff to determine, all right, there is actual erosion happening here versus a little bit of runoff. Maybe that's just a little bit of dirt. We're seeing incision of a stream channel, or we're seeing incision, like deep incision of ditches. That's my interpretation of it.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. I swear I had another one scribbled in here somewhere, but. Anyone else? Oh, I had one question. Here it is. So on Mary's proposals relative to proposed land disturbance, again, I'm looking for definitions here so that we understand, and that I guess that the understanding that we have, or that maybe Mary has, is congruent with what staff also has. So.
And Mayor, you're looking at that G, H, and I?
13.20.040, it's under I, where Mary's suggestion and Councilmember Stewart asked us to look at adding in the language, any area of proposed land disturbance. I was looking for that to be further defined. Are we talking about, them, I mean, obviously if they're clearing off trees, they're gonna go through the tree ordinance on that, but are we talking about understory? What exactly are we talking about cutting in? There are other codes that are going to that's what I'm looking for, a definition of what we mean by land disturbance.
And I think that definition is included in the King County Stormwater Manual already,
Okay.
a form of it. So I can bring that.
So it's defined already. Okay, very good. Deputy Mayor Moran, did you have something else?
I did. This has to do with getting into the wording and stuff for septic systems. And I would like to see since we're not in a spot where, frankly, I'm comfortable with us doing guidelines on that without speaking with the Water and Sewer District. I would like to see the city take the lead on not allowing for more to go in there, and not allowing for people to, when there's stop working, to make sure that people know they need to hook up if it's available. But I think that we should work with the Water and Sewer District to try to secure some of these things that Mary has brought up, because I do think there's a way to do that, and I'd really like to pursue that, but it would be, I don't want to touch the wording on this, because without having the Water and Sewer District involved, I think that would be a terrible mistake. So perhaps, maybe you could put it on your list of things that we need to do, and we should put it on when we talk with the Water and Sewer District. I do know when I was on there, it was something that was on their list of things to do. So I do know it's something they're looking at, but they also know they need to work with the city on it, because they need for us to create the policy. And I know they would like that very much, so.
Well, Deputy Mayor, as it pertains to this code at least, this is not, this is actually protecting septic systems more. So it's not a big change. So yeah, separate policy issue, but we can work on that, maybe, staff.
Okay. I don't see any more questions from council, so we will bring this back on the 17th, is that right? Okay, for adoption, and it sounds like there may be a few tweaks in there that we'll work through.
I can make those notes and then a summary of those minor edits when I bring it back via ordinance.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to council reports and the city manager's report.
Wait a minute. 15.
Yeah.
Oh, did I miss one?
15.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
just
Pretty.
skipped right by it.
Yeah. We could skip it, but no, we need to discuss it.
That's really weird because my stapled version has no 15. That's why I went right over it. It goes from 14 to 16. All right, let me look at this one. And now my eye compass isn't working, so I can't read anything from it.
The Hollywood corridor analysis.
Thank you.
Petite contract.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. City Manager.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. Andrew's coming. And and we'll start discussion.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members. We just are coming to the council with a design contract with Petite to work on the Sahali project as we were instructed back in July. Rather than putting it on consent, we left it on new business to open the floor for any questions that the council may have on that topic, and then specifically on the scope that was submitted.
I'll open it up to council for questions. Councilmember Hornish.
Yeah, a couple questions I noted as I leafed through this, although it was hard to digest. There's a lot of scope here, for sure.
Correct.
But you have on page 2, the 5-lane evaluation for the full study area will not be updated and be removed. But in the, above that, you still have some segments to go to, I think it was 4 and 5 lane. I'm going off my memory now. Is that correct?
I think we were to continue the analysis that was done on the back in 2015, where we looked at a 4-lane, rather, where
3,
we
4,
need
and 5, I think we did.
4 or
right?
5, but that was specifically to north of where we need it, north of 37th. For the rest of the corridor, we were looking at keeping the 3-lane section and analyzing it and determining whether that's what we need to or not in regard to concurrency.
So the 5-lane is not in this scope, is going to be removed from north of 37th to 202?
No, we're looking at that section to be 5 lanes, but within south of 37 throughout the city, we're looking at the 3-lane.
Okay, under this scope?
Correct.
Yeah, and not, okay.
Yeah, this is, again, just, this scope for preliminary.
Okay, I can understand that. I'm glad I clarified that. Thank you. Then I want to clarify in my mind that they are going to be taking their own counts, or you're going to be taking counts in the middle of September if we approve this?
Correct. We'll be doing additional counts and then using the ones we've already collected.
And they're going to somehow use 2019 data, even though we can't use it for a year in the city?
And
Right,
incorporate
good.
it with the model.
Wanted to make sure. And they're going to update it for 2035, which I think was a big point in our motion in July, that we're looking out to 2035.
Correct.
One thing I didn't quite understand is we give them a full year to September of 2020 to come back with some interim reports in between and check statuses, if you will.
We're looking for the final into 2020, but we put it to where they were going to come to council in January or December to do a presentation of what they've determined. Some of the modeling, some of the additional things they just can't. They don't have the capacity to do with the initial analysis. But as it comes to public comment, and bear with me, I'm trying to just vaguely. But it was just, we were going to come to council with everything, the analysis except for the VISM. If we were to do simulations, they would take longer. If we start doing analysis of all the intersections thrown together and going through simulation, those can't get done by January. So those would have to come back in 2020, but all the initial updates and analysis to 2035 would be available before the end of the year.
Is there any way of tightening that up and move it quicker than September? I mean, because like I said, there's interim reports, and the second one, was it November and January? Is that right? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, the fact that it's September now, we're pushing it to get to to December. We're saying we want to present in December. We're looking at the first meeting, which will be December 1st, or the first week in December to present. So we would be getting some. We will be getting data from our consultants in November. That really gives them 2 months to collect the model, run the counts.
That's
it
tight.
would be really tight.
Yeah. But then January is the next report.
Correct. And that would be more the final based on comments that we would get from council.
But do we need 8 months to do final from January to September?
No, we're looking at beginning of 2020 and then move from there if we want to continue a design and go from there.
Okay. I mean, I don't think the council as a body should wait that long if we can push them along, but we can discuss that as far as the actual terms if we want. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, I have a quick question on the scope of work. On page 3, you have the model, at the beginning of page 3, model AM and PM intersection traffic operations using collected 2019 and forecasted 2035 data. And then you go to the first bullet and you say intersections will be evaluated using the current traffic control in the existing conditions of 2019 and no build 2035 analysis. And I'm just curious, what is the no build 2035 analysis versus the current?
So the current is what we have today, and we were working with the consultant on whether they use build, no build during the last week of getting the scope. They'll be analyzing it to 2035 if we don't do anything with the intersections, but they will also be looking at it if we do the concurrency. So they're going to be doing both models to 2035, whether we improve the intersections or we leave them as they are.
So the build, no build is about
no build, no build, and no build.
Not
correct.
About land use.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, so entertain a motion.
Actually, I do have.
Okay, Councilmember Stewart.
Sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to formulate this. So it's great that we look at the road, and I love that we're going to look at the potential of having potentially a reversible lane. One of the questions I have is, where do we do any analysis of what it would look like if we add more transit? Because we don't account for that in our concurrency model anywhere. So and I know I'm being far-fetched, but if tomorrow we got 10 bus routes and we got 20% of the city to start taking buses, we wouldn't know that impact until the next time we took traffic counts, right? So is there something that we're looking at that says if we do this 3-lane option with a reversible lane and we add bus routes, is that something, maybe that's not in the scope of this, but where do we look at that to know, is it why, are our resources, time and money better spent adding more lanes to a point, and then the rest of our time and resources should be looking at how we get people out of their cars into some other mode of transportation?
So with this scope, we're focusing on the concurrency, the traffic as it's out there right now with our models and the traffic counts. If we go to expand this scope later, to start looking at bus turnouts, any other options. That's similar to what we did back in 2015 with the first phase, where we did kind of a menu approach to where we had one item where there were 3 lanes actually handled the traffic, whether we need to widen to 5 lanes. Then we started looking at the climbing lane options, bus turnouts.
Okay.
That would be supplemental. So once we get past this first part of this contract, if we were to then supplement it, we would then look at other options such as the bus turnouts, which would require some widening and right-of-way purchasing, above and beyond what we're looking at now.
I'm just thinking that as we look out to 2035, right, 2024 is when the light rail opens in Marymore. And so looking at having some sort of shuttles from Sammamish to the Marymore light rail stop, a lot of people who commute downtown or even to Bellevue may find that a much more appealing option than driving, because again, the traffic isn't just bad here. I mean, driving to Bellevue, you get to go through 3 sets of traffic, right? You get through Sammamish, you get through Redmond, and then you get into Bellevue, and then you got to find parking. So I'm just wondering how we can do that. So it sounds like that would be the next phase. So this will be looking at just the road improvements, and then we can look at other options as we look at more designs.
And we do have a management reserve on this scope to allow for, if we needed some additional information from our consultant, that if it's within that limit that's approved by the city manager, we can add to the scope of this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with no more questions, I'd entertain a motion to direct our city manager to execute this contract.
I move that we approve this contract.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 7-0, the contract is approved. Do we want to take a break, or should we dive into your report?
We can take a few minutes.
Okay, maybe we should do that. All
Okay.
right. Okay, now we can move to item 16, which is the city manager report.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. So I'm the only one with a report for this meeting. There are quite a few items on here. Obviously, this is a report just to give you information, but if you do have some comments, some brief comments, I'll go ahead, or some direction, I'll go ahead and write that down and we can move forward. So we'll just kind of go through these one at a time. So first item, our HR director recruitment is ongoing. We haven't really received a whole lot of candidates on this, and so we're in talks about options, but it is open until filled. For our deputy city manager recruitment has been very lengthy, and we have produced a finalist. So we are right now reference checks on this person, and then once that gets taken care of and we can meet, talk about offer and everything else, we will send out information to the council and then send out in a news release after that. Pretty excited about that. For our public works director recruitment, we have sent out an RFP. It is out and posted. It is on our website, so we're waiting for responses from consultants to help us with that recruitment. Our employee workspace reconfiguration is underway and is really looking good. So some of you have seen it. If you haven't, new carpet, reconfiguration of cubicles. We're going to move some offices around, but I think it's more conducive. We do have what we're calling a HOV lane now by the window so people can get around. We'll see how that works, but I think it's really good for space management. And then we'll be working on other areas of City Hall once that's done. So we're pretty happy and proud of that. Mid-buy budget discussions are underway. We'll be presenting and bringing that to the council at a later date. I would like to ask the council if you have any requests for that or any ideas, if you would email them to me or Aaron, our finance director. Then we can consider those and bring those as well. But we wanted to open that up to council. Thank you, Mayor, for bringing that up. But we want to make sure that you guys have your ideas put in place as well. Okay? Go ahead.
I have another question first, but I was going to let him go through, and if that's okay.
The whole thing, or just for these first items, maybe? It's really up to you guys.
Okay. Yeah, we had lights on before you ever started, so.
Okay, I'll go through the whole thing. All right. Our facilities division within our department has been split between Public Works and Parks and Rec for a while. We decided to bring that together under one department, free up some time and to make it more efficient. So facilities has been brought together and put under the Parks and Rec, which makes sense. For now, Angie was very gracious about taking that. So now facilities is a full division under Parks and Rec at this time. We're going to try that out and see how that works. And then if we need to make some changes, we'll make some changes. Beaton Hill Park demolition is complete. And as you all know, David Pyle is the interim Department of Community Development, the guru of community development. So thank you, David, for taking that position. David's really doing a good job on that. Our search for a new police chief is underway. In talking to our current chief, we have limited candidates, but we're looking for more. And once we get information, we'll be letting the council know on that. And our city council agenda calendar, the transition into Google Docs, you got an email from Mike Sugg. We're going to be doing some things to make it easier for council to look on the long-term calendar and to let us know, and you'll get a ping when changes are made, so this way you can know that information is coming and any changes that were made. So we're pretty happy about that. Okay, so our TMP Public Workshops, I do have a change. Instead of 100 attendees, we've had about 300 attendees for this. We received a lot of valuable feedback on the projects. The TMP project team will provide an update to the Sammamish City Council on Tuesday, October 15th. What was missing on there was the financial impact. So thank you, Mayor, for bringing that up. That was not done, so we'll try to have some information on that for the council when we bring this back on the 15th. So if you have any issues with that, you can let me know on that. But pretty good turnout. Okay, item 12. So the update on the status of the investigation that began in January of 19. This was the potential illegal dumping investigation. You got an email from Mike that basically says this will be on for the 17th agenda because that's when Mike's staff will be available. So.
Not my staff.
Oh, excuse me. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Item 13, update on the plans, if any, regarding how the YMCA is accounting for the operations of the community center. I have met with a few counselors on this, and I've also met with the YMCA. I am in the process of discussing potential mutually agreed upon contract language amendments for that. If the language amendments don't go like the YMCA or council wants, then we will bring it back to the council, and then I will need a formal vote on what direction the council would like me to go. If we can take care of some of this small stuff within a contract amendment, then we'll bring that back, obviously, for approval. I'll be working with a couple of the councilors and the YMCA to see if we can make this happen. If not, we will bring it back, and I will need direction at that time to go forward or not. Okay, that's YMCA. 14. Update plans, basically the Jaron GMHB hearing. And again, our attorney has sent an email on that hearing stating a 90-day continuance. The 90-day continuance was granted. So at this point, if there's questions on that, we would need to potentially go into executive session to talk about that. Item 15, the staff's update, staff's plan on how it intends to implement council's policy of excluding Sahalli project from the concurrency testing with regards to any concurrency certificate that was issued prior to such party having vested rights. The first part of that on A and B is we're gathering information on that, and that'll be on the 17th as well, because on the 17th we're discussing Sahalli. So we're going to discuss Sahalli with Sahalli on the 17th. That just makes better sense. It's the same road, but we had two motions that were approved by council, the previous motion and then this latest motion. Where that second part comes in that we issued prior having vested rights, that was a question asked by a councilor, and we have to go ahead and answer that, and we would like to address that and answer that at that same time. 16, update on where we are with an outside source investigating our traffic model. We are working on an RFP, but more importantly, we're working on the scope of service, which we are almost done with. We are going to bring that back to council for approval because council made the motion and voted to do the audit. So we want to make sure that we capture what the council's ideas are for this audit. So before we go ahead with this, we're going to bring it back to council. We're hoping to bring this back on the 17th as well, the scope, and then working on an RFP to basically get a consultant to do this work. And then 17, discussion of adding a requirement to code that a land use permit applicant that is an entity such as an LLC be required to disclose the interests of all real persons with interest in the entity before any application is completed or before permits are released. This was a question from Councilor as well, the Deputy Mayor, and the Deputy Mayor has provided me with some information and an example. So I'm going to bring this back for discussion. Hopefully on the 17th, I will be discussing it with our attorney prior to see if anything needs to happen, or can we do this in executive session, or are we going to do this in an open meeting, and then we'll discuss it from there. So with that, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council, I'll leave it to you for some quick comments.
I have every light on. Okay.
Yay.
Councilmember Stewart.
Okay.
Yeah, so regarding item number 15, where you say
15.
update on staff's plan as to how it intends to implement council's policy of excluding the Sahalli project from concurrency testing with regards to any concurrency certificate that was issued prior to such party having vested rights. That is not a policy. As you clarified, that was a question from council. As I understand it, although I wasn't here, the motion that was passed in August was about removing the Sahalli improvement project from the concurrency testing.
Yes.
So could you please amend your report to reflect that this is simply a question? There is no council policy on this.
Yeah, the council policy of excluding Sahalli project from concurrency testing with regards to any and yes, I will amend that to say that policy is only for pulling Sahalli
from future tests.
Yes, from future. Right, from future. There was a question on the vesting rights,
Right,
which
but that's
we need to
separate.
answer. Yeah.
That's not a policy.
Yeah.
So I
Those are
just wanna-
two separate items.
Correct, but it doesn't read that way.
Okay, so I'll amend my
Just clarify that,
report
right,
and clarify
okay.
these are two separate issues, and thank
Right.
you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Hornish.
Okay, I'll start with number 15.
Okay.
I agree with what was said, that was not the policy, but it was not a policy to only exclude future either. So go back and look at the tapes, please. It was to exclude it from concurrency testing. There was no discussion on whether it was only for current or future.
Okay.
So don't take what was just said, that it was only future.
Yeah, we'll research that.
Okay.
Thank you.
In that regard, I'm going to get up on a soapbox and talk a little bit about when 4 years ago I decided to run, I felt like the city staff and city manager at the time often took the position that it was a GMA Growth Mandate Act instead of a Growth Management Act. And in the same regard, it felt like staff often took the view of the developer over the citizens. I would posit that staff rethink that, given the elections that we've had and the people on the council. And in any time there is legal questions, there's always, and as an attorney, I know there's legal opinions on both sides of everything. I would posit that instead of taking the developer's side and being concerned about the developer suing us, we take the position of the citizens and let the developer sue us instead of the citizens have to. And I think part of that analysis in the staff and in the lawyers' minds are the developers have deeper pockets, they're more likely to sue, so if we take their position, we'll save money. I don't think that's what we're supposed to do as counselors. I don't think that's what we as a city council or as city staff should be doing either. So it's a little bit of a step back that if it's a gray area, don't default just to take the developer's side. I talked about the risk assessment. If it's a gray, perfect example tonight. What's the definition of significant? What's the definition of severe? Two opinions. Which side are you going to take? Let's side for the citizens here for a little bit. That doesn't mean we stop all growth, but it does mean we manage growth. So Just a mind shift is all I'm asking from staff.
Okay.
Number 2, number 13 on the why. I've been a cheerleader on this. I've been pushing it for almost 2 years now, year and a half at least. I know we had a change in staff, change in city management, and back in May, we started this process and discussion. So I think it's time to do something. I'm willing to try to negotiate some language changes. However, I think we as council need to set some policy outline scope as to what we expect in those changes, instead of you spinning your wheels saying, here's some changes, and it's like, well, this isn't what we're looking for. So I want to try to give you some feedback tonight. And third thing in that regard, willing to negotiate, but I do think we need to set some time limits to decide, are we making progress or are we not? So I would propose as soon as 2 weeks from now, at our next meeting, we get an update on that again to find out where are we, what's happening, what's been discussed, because I've been in these discussions and they haven't moved along very well, is my point. But I'm willing to try again to let staff try. I have 3 things that I think should, and timing might be controlled about what these 3 things that I think need to be addressed. Number 1, in the current agreement, there is a clause that says we as a city have to approve the CapEx maintenance plan. To my knowledge, we have never done that. And to my knowledge, the Y has decided what their CapEx reserves are, and it is a questionable and very dubious process of how they're doing it. So I think we have to hold their feet to the fire to the current language as to show us where we approved your CapEx maintenance, and if we haven't, let's establish what a reasonable CapEx maintenance plan is for the building. That's number 1. 1A, what's not addressed in the current agreement is if they reserve, and I think I calculated in our discussions over 25 years, they may reserve about $40 million. At the end of 25 years, or even sooner, at the end of 10 years, if there's $10 million there, the agreement doesn't address what happens if they reserved more than they ever spent on that CapEx maintenance. We need to have some language as to what happens to that excess reserves for CapEx maintenance. 8E Romanet 2. Number 2, we need language as to how they are going to account for the operations. Why do we need this? Because it really drives everything as to what is the excess profits of this operations. What expenses get loaded? Just to remind everybody, there's 3 buckets. The CapEx reserve, 2 months operating, and then whatever is left over from excess gets reinvested here in Sammamish. Right now, everything is going into bucket 1, the CapEx maintenance. And it's going to downtown Seattle. We don't even see it. We don't know what it is, where it is, if it'll ever be used. That was my first point about how to address the CapEx. But on top of that, you have income and you have expenses. What expenses should be included to figure out the excess? Currently, and there is no guidance in the agreement, so this is where language can come in handy. The Y, as the accountants, are expensing an interest charge on their capital contribution of $5 million for the facility here. We don't get an interest charge for our $28 million or $30 million, whatever it was. Doesn't make sense that they're taking an interest charge and expensing that from the operations. 2B, they're also allocating an expense of their bonds from Seattle's Y's operations that they financed, that we're paying here from Sammamish. That doesn't make sense to me. So we need to address that. Number 3, or 2C, overhead expenses of their operations of downtown Seattle Y. There's probably some that needs to be there, and this is a little more squishy as to how much and how you allocate that, but we need to spell it out what should be allocated to get deducted from the revenue for this operations over here. 2D, what heads are included? We went through this process as to what revenue is included and then what expenses are included, and they seem to deduct in one process revenue, but not the expenses. So we need to be very clear what is included in the operations of the facility and what is as revenue and what is expensed in the operations of the Sammamish facility. There are other issues, but I won't go on all those. But those are some main points that I think we need to address when you're talking to them that you can talk about. Third point is we can add some language, and I know there is some concern, and I acknowledge that the Y doesn't want to be on the hook from their operations or their funds if there is a big CapEx that comes up that they don't have reserved. So I think we can have some flexibility that if we get a proper accounting of the operations of Sammamish Community Center for revenue minus the proper revenue minus the proper expenses with a proper CapEx maintenance reserve, then we have a profit. And if that all flows to bucket 3, we can have a mechanism that, hey, if there's not enough in bucket 1 for the CapEx, we can take that money and flow it back up to be used for that too. An idea. Now, those are not easy things to discuss. So I come back to my question as to a timing, but I would still suggest that we at least get an update in 2 weeks. But I don't think you're going to hammer all this out in 2 weeks with the YMCA.
No, it's not going to happen. However, we will shoot for the first meeting in October. This gives me the extra 2 weeks. So I'll shoot for that. But this is information I have to tell them. But if we're going to do anything, I need the consensus from the council at that time. How are we going to proceed, basically? And should we proceed? I'm going to need to know that from the council.
Well, will October be proposed language or just an update then?
We're going to have to propose a language and maybe do both if we want to push this thing forward.
Okay. And then you can see where we're at as a council as to those changes. Okay?
I mean, that's what I'm going to push for.
Okay. Fair enough. Last comment I have is on number 16 as to the outside source investigating our traffic model. I don't think that's quite what we moved as I went back and looked at today. There was an amendment that we bring in a consultant to analyze the input and assumptions that were made in the modeling of concurrency. I don't think we need an RFP. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a couple months ago you said if for a consultant, we can get who we think is the best person. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Generally, there is a specific statute for architect and engineering services, but most cities, including Sammamish, every January ask for SOQs from those firms, and so we can pick from the firms that did submit those SOQs. We don't have to go out and do a separate process.
SOQ is?
Statement of qualifications.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So in this case, I think what Rick's point is we want council to make sure that the scope is what you want to see.
That I would agree with, but I think it's pretty limited as to, if you look at the motion that was passed, inputs and assumptions that were used in concurrency testing.
Okay.
I looked at both the minutes as well as the tape, and it's pretty clear. I really do not think we need to wait 2 more weeks to do that. But I'm one council member. If anybody else feels the same way, they can speak up. But I think we need to get going on this sooner rather than later.
We are going on it. I mean, you guys got us doing all kinds of things, and so we're going on as fast as we can go. I need to get this to you at a council meeting so you can look at the scope before we go out for anything.
Can we have a special meeting next week and do that? Or do we? Well, I don't know. We need a special meeting. We could do.
I mean, if you want to do a special meeting, you can do a special meeting.
We could do it at a study session, right? It's just guidance.
We can put it on the study session on the Tuesday. I'd be happy to do that.
I would propose that we move that forward and lean forward and set priorities because this is important to our citizens.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Because the other problem that I have with the RFP is not that I do think we need to look at the scope of work, but to put it out for RFP, but then we got to put it out for 30 days. We've got a long waste of time. And when I'm looking at some of that stuff, there's things that I'm picking up. So I don't think it should take that long. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to see us be able to move a little faster on that than to have to wait for an RFP and then put it out for 30 days and then wait longer than that.
I have no problem doing any of that.
Okay, I'm going to give the floor back to Councilmember Hornish here because he had the floor.
Actually,
I don't know if you're
finished.
done.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I am finished.
Thank you, Councilor.
Councilmember Ross.
Thank you. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Councilmember Hornish talked about. YMCA, you hit the points very well. I'm an accountant. That's where I started my career. And the way they're accounting for their facilities reserves is incomprehensible. And the way they're allocating a service charge interest based on debt that we have not incurred. We paid cash. Is also inappropriate from an overhead and an expense standpoint. And all the overhead allocations need to be examined. Now, with that all said, I'm not confident that we're going to get anywhere adding any of these parameters, because we went many rounds with the Y and to the point where the leader said, I think we just need to go through the arbitration process. They had given up. They said, they threw their hands up. He says, stay out of their pockets. We took the risk. We get all the money. And they want to keep the reserves for managing the facility. That's not the way the agreement reads, even at a light read. The agreement reads that if you're reserving excess over expense in those 3 buckets we talk about, you should be accumulating a bucket. They should be tracking the number of assets that they need to replace over the time period and what's the useful life of those assets, and figure out amortization and the annual amount you need to reserve based on asset cost replacement. You put it in a reserve. So I'll give you a simple example. 10-year roof, $10 million. You need to reserve $1 million a year. At the end of 10 years, you got $10 million to pay for that new roof. They got to do that for each and every asset that they have. They are not doing that. They will not do that. And so as a result, it's not accountable. Once you build that reserve, you draw from the reserve. You make that expenditure against the roof. You take out of that reserve pool that needs to be visible to the citizens of Sammamish. So we need to spend as little time as possible to negotiate any further. If they get one chance, as far as I'm concerned, we need to move on. We have to go through for arbitration. I think probably an independent accountant to do an assessment would be helpful, because they really are following no accounting principles applying to our separate statement. They're applying the entire CLY principles. The audited statements of the CLY are appropriate. But we are a statement, a separate statement, and they cannot apply the same principles of allocations to us necessarily to come up with our retention of what we're generating. And we're far more successful at the Y from a CAS perspective than we ever imagined. So I'm very concerned, and so I really urge us to give them the chance to come forward and help us get a resolution, but I'm not confident we will. But I'd be very, very surprised and pleased if we do. And I like the Y, I like the leadership. We just fundamentally don't agree on the accounting. So that's where we are on that. On the number 16, on the traffic model, are we gonna, I sent an email, and there was a very knowledgeable person that's been involved in our community for decades, asking a question about the ITE assumptions, the IT modeling assumptions, and how do we reconcile that to the outcome of the last concurrency modeling? Are we going to put that with the that's part of the, I would think. Is that the scope? Is that part of number 16? I want to make sure we.
Yeah, but since none of this is an agenda item, we shouldn't be discussing any of it. I just need direction from the council. Yeah. But if you want something like that, okay, when we bring the scope to you to look at, then we can add that at that time to make sure the scope is exactly what the council wants. And I also need from the council, if you know any good consultants that can do this, no, I will find a group of people and we will make sure that we get this done, okay? But I need the council to really let us know if the scope is exactly what you want. And we will bring that back at that time.
Okay, and I won't spend more than 30 more seconds on the mid-buy, but I do want to make sure that we agree on an approach, because this entire council is fully supportive of making sure public safety is a #1 priority and fully funding our needs that we need for Sammamish. What I don't want to do is say, attach a tax to an emotional item. In other words, let's just prioritize, acknowledge this is what we need for public safety. Look at the lower priority items on the list that's not funded, not the top of the list, the bottom of the list, and ask ourselves the fundamental question: is that a high enough priority to raise taxes for our citizens? And that's drawing from the bottom, not are critical requirements of public safety. That's how you grow your government too big real quick, is when you keep adding on, and using the emotional items to draw a new tax. So we got to fund the priorities and look at the bottom of the list, and do we want to fund everything we previously did, or is something we can do at a lower cost and not raise the whole tax on the whole total budget? So we got to think about how we do that, and it's going to take some effort from staff to think about what are some items lower priority. We just have to, that's a different type of budgeting approach. It's not a zero-based budgeting, but every business and entity should be prioritizing their budgets on a regular basis. So when we go through the mid-buy, we got a lot of important items we have to address. They're probably going to be on the top of the list. So let's try to figure out how to be as fiscally responsible and putting only lower priority at risk, not higher priorities at risk.
Okay.
And that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
One quick note, just because we had the agenda meeting earlier today, is that our city manager said we are probably going to have a workshop in October relative to the budget. So we might be able to work through some of those issues that you identified, Councilmember Ross. Okay. Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, let me start with the YMCA issue to begin with. First of all, when was that contract signed? 2012? Somewhere around there.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
After 3 years, this has now become an urgent issue that from this council members here. I'm concerned, City Manager, you said you're going to meet with a couple of council members. We did away with the task force specifically on this so that the whole council will be engaged in these discussions. We should invite the YMCA here. I'm shocked at the tone that's being taken here. Previously in discussions, I heard that things are going great, that we've got this great relationship, we have these minor differences. Now it sounds like we got a great marriage, but we're going to marriage counseling with our attorneys just to review the vows on that. And I think there's some misrepresentations as to that. I asked that people should go back to the tapes of 2012 when the original agreement was made with the YMCA. I'm always willing to go back and look at that arrangement. The expectation was clearly that they would lose money, and the city council at that time did not want to be involved with it because every other city-run Y and programs had lost money. And we specifically asked them, you lose money, who's going to be covering your money? And they said the greater Y was committed to put money into it. So that was the arrangement that was made out there at that point in time. If we want to come back, it's got to be an amicable discussion out there. We have 20,000 members plus now at that Y. So we need to also make sure. At this point, I'd like to hear the Y. I've been hearing from a lot of people in the city that there are major capital expenses coming up over there. I've heard of HVACs, I've heard of tiles, I've heard of bathroom refinishings. I think we better be careful as we're going into any discussions at a time, because that's what we were expecting with the last council. We expected them to be slower in picking up their membership. I think that was the real surprise. Time limits are now being put on 2 weeks. I haven't heard the why here after we've been told that they're doing great. Before we put any time limits on, I'd like to hear the why to go through. This is one of the reasons why I'm concerned about that task force and not being able for all of us to directly hear from the why, their perspectives of what's going on, and what changes could be made that's amenable. I don't know if this tone is necessary of saying, we got to have it in 2 weeks, we got to have language. I haven't seen any proposed language. I don't even know what we can legally say and impose upon them, much less on that. So I think that we need to step back. We've got to hear the why, and then I'd like to get legal input into what is our real position on this. I know the contracts of two parties, so both parties have to be engaged into it, and I know that there are perceptions in that, but on those perceptions, I would go back to the original tapes to see what did the council originally say and agree to, and what those perceptions were at the onset. It doesn't sound like we have to hold their feet to the fire as much as our feet to the fire. If there's been no CAPSEX plans approved for the last number of years, well, that's both parties needed to have been doing that. So that's shame on us as well as them. Let's try to fix that if that's an issue. If there are other issues, let's walk down and list them, what they are and what can be fixed normally and be adhered to. But I think that we're jumping way out without understanding how deep the waters are before we jump into this pool. And since it's such a happy marriage, I'd like to hear the other party's discussion into it. And I would not like to have you working with 2 council members. You work with all of us. That was the agreement. There's no task force. It's to the whole body in public that this was going to be done. So let's do it in public as we had agreed. On number 15, and since you seem to be picking on the same, it is 2 different items. We should break those up in the wording of them. I agree with that they should be. There was no discussion that I heard. I listened to the tape again and asked the city manager as far as concurrency certificates that were issued prior to such parties having vested rights as part of the motions. I did hear about talking from 2016 assumptions and things. So if we could just make sure you go back, check the tape, and break it in 2 according to what it says at that point, that would be satisfactory to go through. On 16, yeah, I'd like to look at a statement of work of what we're going to be passing out. I think if we're going to be rushing it, at least let's get the body agreed on what we're asking them. How many times have we divided up on this later on? Let's be in sync there. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ritchie, I just want to give you an opportunity. Is he still?
I'm good, thanks. I'm enjoying the conversation.
Okay, we haven't heard from you all night. I just want to make sure, but because I got more lights on and I have to give everybody an opportunity to talk before I let anybody else have a secondary time to talk. So do you have any comments or no?
Not at this point. Thank you for asking.
Well, I do before we go round 2. On number 5, and hold on, let me just see what I have here. The city manager and I discussed specifically police today at the agenda meeting and what that will look like coming forward. I think where we landed again was that whatever we're going to have in October, study session of sorts where we can kind of go through the budget as it comes forward, and that will be part of it. Let me scroll down here. Item 11, I was just going to reiterate what the city manager had previously stated, is that at the TMP workshops, and I'm fearful of what the information then that comes forward to council on the 15th of October looks like, when we asked our residents to take a look in the showroom floor of cars, and we gave them a Ford and we gave them a Ferrari, and we didn't tell them how much they cost. And so, I'm fearful that people pick the Ferrari not knowing that that might come with a tax bill to them. So I had asked for that specifically to be part of these discussions so that people could pick not just based on what looked good, but what also made sense. So I'm disappointed that we did not do that. And I wanted to make that statement because I think that will impact what the results are back to council on the TMP. Okay, now we've got round 2. Councilmember Ross? Okay. Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to thank staff for all their hard work, and I am disappointed that once again we attempt to throw staff under the bus. I think that's inappropriate. I think if a council member has an issue with staff, that is an appropriate conversation to have with the city manager, but not just making general comments from the dais. To accuse staff of not siding with the citizens, our staff work tirelessly, and they don't just work for the ginormous paychecks that civil servants tend to get. They work hard for our community. I think it's also important that the council not put our thumbs on the scales for any particular certificates or applications or permits. The process is set up so that the council cannot put their thumbs on the scales in either direction. And I think that it is imperative that the council not have a say in who is selected to do an independent audit, because then it would no longer be independent. So I just want to state that it is completely and wholly inappropriate for us to lean and put any pressure on staff to make a judgment either way. And it's particularly disappointing because there are a lot of accusations being thrown around about people trying to put their thumbs on the scales in one way, and I see the council trying to act to put their thumbs on the scales in the other way. And it's the whole thing is supposed to be that we don't. We pass the policy, and then it is executed upon independently so that there is no impropriety. And I'd like to see us continue to work that way. In regards to the YMCA, I just want to clarify a few things. First of all, the maintenance plan that was put forth by the YMCA, they clarified that the initial estimates for their maintenance plan were incredibly conservative, meaning that they were high, because when they first took over the facility, it was the middle of the year, and they had not had the opportunity to have an independent study done to come up with what that plan should be. So the initial financial statements had a very high, basically 100% replacement cost of everything in the YMCA. They then had the study completed, and we're going to use the revised numbers based on that study, which would lower the amount of reserves that would be required. So to say that they just did it willy-nilly and that it was too high, they qualified that and said that in fact that was what they did initially, and that a study has been done, and that they can that they will update that those numbers for that maintenance. The other thing that's really important for people to understand is that the contract was written so that the residents of Sammamish have zero risk in running that facility. So it is written so that we are guaranteed to get that facility back in the condition in which we gave it to the YMCA to begin with. And all of the risk falls to the YMCA. In that, what the agreement says, what the contract states, is that there will in fact be multiple reserve funds, and that it says, so after the maintenance and operation reserve funds, it says, in the unlikely event that there are any excess funds, that those may, and I emphasize, it says the word may, be reinvested in the facility if mutually agreed upon by both parties. So I think that it's important to realize that when this agreement was written, there was not an expectation that there would potentially be any excess funds, and if there were, they weren't expected to be very high. And those excess funds, if they do exist, will be reinvested in the facility. They're not profits to come back to the citizens. That money is not coming from tax dollars. That money is coming from membership fees that people pay to the YMCA. The other thing to keep in mind is that the YMCA has been more popular than expected, which means that the maintenance is actually accelerating. And so we, the city, I shouldn't say we, the city staff does an exceptional job of going over there monthly and doing a full walkthrough of the facility with the YMCA, and they come up with a very detailed checklist of everything that needs to be repaired. And there are some pretty high dollar things coming up for repair earlier than expected. Councilmember Valderrama alluded to the fact that in every other community where there's a pool, cities are closing down their pools, because when those pools have to be redone, which will happen over the course of this 25-year period, most municipalities can't afford to redo their pools. All of that liability rests with the YMCA at this point in time, and not on the city of Sammamish or any of its residents. So I just think it's really important for people to understand that. I think it's really important that we do have these discussions with the full council and not with individual councilors. I think if people have input to share, I think that's great. But I think that it is critical that we have these conversations with the full council, because even when we had the task force, I submitted a list of questions to our task force and never got a response to any of those questions. So I think there are a lot of things we can try to propose to work out to clarify with the YMCA, to clarify these things. I think Councilmember Hornish had one good point, which is I think there are a couple of things, not just that there's a capital improvement maintenance plan that needs to be approved, but there's also supposed to be an independent body that reviews things periodically that's supposed to be made up of citizens. So I think there are a couple of things that both sides have not necessarily executed according to the agreement that we can improve upon. But to imply that the YMCA is somehow draining money away from the citizens of Sammamish and doing anything like that is just not true. So I just think that we should, one, strike a much more consensus building kind of tone. The YMCA has been an incredible partner in the city. when the Boys and Girls Club closed or canceled their after-school care just before school started a few years ago, it was the YMCA who stepped in and created after-school care with transportation to help working parents in the city. So, you know, they're not evil. They're not trying to rob or pillage or anything like that. So I think we all just need to take a breath and to work through this like the adults that we all are. Thanks.
Mayor.
Yes.
We're getting a little out of scope here from my manager's report, so I just wanted a consensus. We'll bring all this stuff back. Yeah, but they're not agenda items, so I just need a few comments, but I'll just throw that at you in the council. So.
Okay. I don't see any lights going off, though. Deputy Mayor Moran.
I'll try to keep mine minimal, but I get to do a little bit.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So first one on expanding the facilities. I never really got to do my full first round, so we're going to have to go back a little bit. So when you say expanding the facilities, does that mean that we're going to see parks in charge of like the Public Works building over on 244th? I mean, what are we talking?
What I can bring a report, and we can have them actually come and give a report to the council. I can't answer those questions. This is my manager's report. So
Okay.
I'm just letting you know what we did for efficiency and to be better. But we can actually bring a report, and I would be happy to do that.
That would be great.
Okay.
Okay, then going on to number 10, which was the City Council agenda calendar. And I had, for some reason, in my crazy calendar, I had that we had switched some stuff around. We had meetings at the end of this month, and it was due to, if I remembered correctly, Councilmember Hornish was going to be in town. So I had things all booked around. So I don't know what's happened with the calendar, if we've changed the calendar, or because I checked with other council members who go, oh yeah, that's right.
What?
Sounds like not me.
Yeah, the meeting, so there was a meeting scheduled for the 30th,
Right.
but that got canceled.
Okay.
And it's been canceled for a while.
Okay. So I just didn't see that. Okay. Which is totally possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so hopefully, being able to access this new calendar via Google, when you get your packet, if you go look at that calendar on Thursday, you'll be able to see in track changes, everything that's changed on it.
Excellent. Okay.
And then Monday, we're going to accept all those changes so that we'll start clean again.
Okay.
Because it changes.
All right.
And I'm sorry, did you say we'll get notifications when things change after that?
You're actually not.
There's a
going- I
ping,
know.
right?
You know what? If you want that, you have a Google account?
No.
Okay, so you have to have a Google account to
I
get
do.
the pin. I know, so that's what we thought. We thought, does everybody really want to ping
do.
every time that thing
Well, I don't
changes?
want a Google account.
And you don't want a Google account, so this way you don't need either, but we'll send it to you on a weekly basis, and you can always go to that
Excellent.
link
Okay.
any day and look at it.
Thank you.
Change, that'll be helpful.
If they'll reset, yeah, if they send out the link, because otherwise, from
Right.
like sifting through emails trying to find the link.
Right.
And we'll,
Okay.
we'll send out the link again.
Okay, and then on to number 11. I got lots of emails over the summer from people, and I'm going to bring it up again, the people that were away. I brought this up in spring when we talked about having all the meetings during the summertime. I've got a neighbor who I would like to say, she was thrilled to death because she gave her input at the farmer's market 3 times, her name, her daughter's name, and her other daughter's name. So I'm a little concerned that we're not getting a lot of people, because doing this stuff during the summertime is probably the worst time because so many people travel. So I'm again going to say that I really would like to see us hold yet another workshop, but it should be during a time when everybody's in town and not out of the city during vacation. I also want to comment on the fact that I did go to the one that was up at Blackwell Elementary. I was standing in the back for a little while and then ended up talking to somebody and not going into the room. But one of the things that I noticed is that what's happening is people are getting dots, but they're not getting the explanation of the projects, of why we have to do some of the projects. Or, we have to do this project. It's turning into a popularity contest of projects. And that's not going to work well for anybody because they're going to be very unhappy when we have to do the one project that nobody likes because it's not pretty. And so I'm really, I don't know if what we need to do is get our hands around that scope a little bit or adjust the questions, but I feel like, you know, I've gotten questions from people that feel like, you know, hey, I'm not getting an option on, I'm being told, hey, do you want A, B, or C, when what they really wanted was D. And so I don't know if that's going to be coming at us in October.
Well, you can ask those questions when we bring this to you in October, and then if we need to do some changes and add more meetings, I'm sure staff would be happy to do that.
Oh, I'll bet they'll be thrilled.
But huh? Yeah, overjoyed. But this is something we can talk again. We can talk once we bring these items back. This was just a quick overview for the council and direction to move forward.
Okay, and then on number 14, I personally, I did have some questions, but if I'm the only one who had questions for the attorney, I guess I can call him. Number 16, I don't know if, I agree with everything that's been said here, but I don't know if it's tonight that I need to make a motion to allow you to go out and just, you know, is tonight where I need to make a motion? I can't do it at a work session to tell you to, hey, I want to make a motion that you can go out and after we've looked at the scope and we've come up with the scope, that you go out and hire somebody.
What I would suggest is, and I think there was head nodding already, let Rick bring back the scope next Tuesday at your study session. At that point, assuming there's more head nodding, I'm hopeful at least that the fee for this work will be within his spending authority, and he can just sign a contract and get underway.
Okay.
If not, that contract will have to come back to you on the 17th.
Right, okay. Then the last thing, and I'm,
Thank you.
okay, so the last thing, I am going to get on my soapbox a little bit, and this has to do with the why. First of all, I don't know the contract. I don't have it memorized. I have some friends that love the why. I have some friends that don't like the why. I have, when the contract was written, it probably should have been looked at again because at the time, you know, we had 3 council members that were sitting there approving it that were sitting on the board for the why. So we should have probably taken the time to look at it again. To say that this is coming at us now, and it's such a surprise because we want to see it in 2 weeks. They've been arguing over this thing for a year, so none of this is a surprise. And we also need to separate the fact that we can absolutely love the Y, and I think they do some wonderful programs. I think they do some wonderful things for the community. But we also have to remember that it is our job to do our due diligence for the residents of this community with their money. So it is our job to look into it. And that is I'm not saying anything's wrong. I don't know if anything's wrong, but I can't say, we've got people saying there isn't something wrong. I can't say that. I haven't looked at it, I don't know. And until we ask those questions, it is our job to do them, the due diligence of, hey, your money's going here and we're gonna protect it. And I think that's what we need to do. So that's all I'm gonna do. I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hornish.
I agree. We have no subcommittee anymore, so it's everybody, so we all need to know what we're talking about. So I wanted to highlight the agreement was signed on 4/29/13. We didn't get a report from the financial operations until about March of 2018, 18 months ago. We raised questions. We had numerous discussions. They changed their accounting methodology in the beginning of this year for 2019 based on some of those questions. Still didn't address some of our questions, but they changed the whole methodology. And we still don't have questions answered. As far as what they're reserving, they did get a third-party estimate, but they're not using it. They're taking the full value and still reserving a full CapEx. So we need to know what we're saying when we're saying what they're actually doing. And given the discussions and involvement I've had, I wanted to correct the record as to what the Y is actually doing versus what somebody thinks they're doing. They're reserving $40 million over 25 years, I think it is something roughly like that, for full replacement when we have to pay for the insurance. Thank you.
The lights are off. Okay. So, we can't because we have a mega
Am I done?
executive session.
Am I done?
Yeah, you're off the hook, at least for that part anyway.
At least for now. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Okay, so we do have an executive session. We're estimating an hour. Is that correct?
Yeah, hopefully it won't go. Yeah, it's on. Hopefully it won't go an hour, but we do have a couple of items. But we scheduled an hour so that we can have ample time to do it. So.
Okay, so we'll be back around 9:50, and this is for potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101I.
I mistakenly thought we were all done.
We're not done. We're not done.
Okay, I think we have a couple motions to make here. So
Can I go?
Go for it.
Okay. I move to authorize the city manager to execute a settlement agreement with Brixton Homes LLC, under which Brixton Homes LLC, 1, pays the sum of $95,250 to the city for unpermitted tree damage and removal, and 2, restores the affected area pursuant to city code.
Second. Okay, been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, I don't see any. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 7-0.
I have
We
a
have passed
motion.
that. Okay, Deputy Mayor Moran.
I'd like to make a motion. I move that the council authorize the city manager to execute the proposed CR2A agreement with King County to resolve the pending lawsuits involving the East Lake Sammamish Trail.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 6-1, the motion passes. I think that's all she wrote. I'd entertain a third motion to adjourn.
I move we, yeah,
Okay, it's
second.
been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 7-0, we are adjourned.
Thank you.